Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your archbishop of Banterbury, your evangelist of the imagination, and of course, your existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am Robcasting at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations, episode number 684. 684. You know, I'm a child of the 80s, and we've talked a lot about the 1980s on this particular program. And, you know, I feel like I've been dealing with 80s nostalgia for almost as long as I lived in the 80s. Probably longer, maybe twice as long, because 80s nostalgia seemed to have been, as soon as the calendar flipped over to 1990, 80s nostalgia was already in full force, and it's really never left for like 30 years. And I think about, like, well, why? I mean, obviously the 80s, I spent my teenage and young adult years in the 80s. I really grew up in the 80s, and there's a lot of talk about the 80s, and our pop culture is drenched in references to the 80s. Everything old is new again. Cobra Kai, Top Gun Maverick. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And it was interesting because normally I kind of think about this in a passing way, and the fact that I've talked about on this show that pop culture in the 80s was strangely sort of all interconnected. Pop culture, when I say whether it's music, movies, fashion, television, it all was sort of interconnected in a way that I don't think it is now. Like in the 80s, when you'd see a movie and you liked the movie, you get the soundtrack album. That was like a thing, you know, or you'd get singles or something. And when you'd see a movie like The Breakfast Club, Simple Minds was not exactly a band people had heard of. But, of course, after Don't You Forget About Me becomes a big song in that, then everybody knows who Simple Minds is, and you hear that song on the radio, and even to this day it plays on the radio, and you know exactly. I mean, that song was in the Breakfast Club 36 years ago, and it's pretty incredible that it resonates even to this day. There was something about pop culture in the 80s, and you know, I was reading an article about this very thing over the weekend, go figure, and I thought I would share it with all of you. Now, this article was published on May 7th, and it was an NBC News story. And Brian Reisman, journalist and cultural critic, wrote this article. And I thought I'd share it. Nostalgia often comes in 20-year cycles. In the 80s, the 60s were big. In the 90s, the 70s, and the aughts, the 80s returned. And by the 10s, when the 90s revival started, the 80s were still going strong. The 80s revival has continued in bursts for 2 decades now, twice as long as the original era. While silly slang like "gag me with a spoon," "totally tubular, man," hasn't survived in our cultural lexicon, many other aspects of the vibrant 1980s endure. In some ways, it feels like it never ended. Want proof? Season 4 of the CW's Dynasty, a reboot of the famous 80s primetime soap opera, starts Friday. The Netflix-acquired hit show Cobra Kai, a direct sequel to the 1984 hit movie The Karate Kid, has wrapped production on its 4th season. ABC's 80s-based cult hit The Goldbergs have been running for 8 seasons, and beloved Netflix sensation Stranger Things, set in Midwestern America in the 1980s, will return for its 4th season in 2022. And that's just the tip of the 80s pop culture iceberg. May 13th is Top Gun Day, which will kick off a 1-week theatrical re-release to mark the film's 35th anniversary. The long-awaited sequel to the famous Tom Cruise flick will sweep into theaters in November. 6 movies in, the blockbuster Transformers franchise, spawned from an 80s animated series, has several sequels and spin-off in the works. The Back to the Future musical hits London's West End in August, presumably with Broadway aspirations. The Eddie Murphy sequel Coming to America 2 was a hit for Amazon Prime. And the 5th installment of the next Indiana Jones is now being cast. It's the same story in music and fashion. Goth is quietly making a comeback. 80s clothing like studded apparel and leg warmers have returned, and modern pop artists The Weeknd, Dua Lipa, Lady Gaga, and Bruno Mars are all drawing influences from the decade. Why are we so hung up on this particular bygone era? The decade of decadence was a time of excess for sure, particularly in its hairband-dominated latter half, but its brash attitudes, bold color schemes, and cultural touchstones still resonate today because of the artistic forces it unleashed and the social change it cemented. It can be argued that the 1980s was a modern renaissance of creativity paired with technological innovation that ricocheted across all aspects of media. Writ large, blockbuster films and franchises came of age. CGI special effects began revolutionizing the experience of going to the movies, and digital production expanded the horizons of pop music, for better and worse. Spurred on by the Fast and the Furious rise of MTV, meanwhile, music videos featuring chameleon-like megastars such as Prince and Madonna changed the nature of pop stardom, while heavy metal, hip-hop, and dance pop exploded. On the home front, the scope of personal media consumption swelled like never before as personal computers, VCRs, video games, and Walkmans became ubiquitous in American households. These changes all powered or were powered by the increasing diversity of talents and expression unleashed by the civil rights and women's rights movements and the Stonewall riots a generation earlier. While battling mainstream homophobia, gay culture made great strides, particularly in music and fashion. For me, there's always been a big argument that gay culture has led the charge with popular culture, said Keenan Duffy, an award-winning fashion designer and slinky vagabond singer. Gay culture went beyond the behind-the-scenes area into front and center in the 1980s, he said, paving the way for mainstream shows like RuPaul's Drag Race. He noted that 25 years ago that wouldn't have been possible, but it's been made possible by what happened 30 years ago. 20-year-old singer and social media influencer Violet Sky, a.k.a. Glitterwave 80s, agreed that the era's burgeoning diversity was part of what attracted her to fashion her image and persona of 20 and living like it's 1989. The 80s were the first time where so many people of all different backgrounds and statuses got to really make a difference, especially in music, and it set the stage for generations to come, she said. At the same time, technological change had yet to revolutionize communication and personal interaction. The 80s was the last decade of true simplicity before computers and the internet took over our lives, and we miss and wonder what constant face-to-face communication would be like, Sky noted. I think people of this generation are longing for a time where the world wasn't so technologically advanced in a way, especially after the pandemic has isolated us even more. Indeed, there was something innocent and naive about the 80s. America had come out of the 70s dominated by the Watergate scandal, the Vietnam War, the energy crisis, the Iran hostage crisis, and massive inflation. When the 80s rolled in, Americans craved positive and life-affirming culture, and blockbusters like the first Star Wars trilogy happily obliged by blasting open the doors for escapist Hollywood entertainment. The 80s were far from perfect. We had Ronald Reagan's trickle-down economics, the Iran-Contra affair, the AIDS crisis, rampant cocaine use, and the omnipresent Cold War. It was also the decade of greed is good mantra espoused by Wall Street character Gordon Gekko and practiced by people like junk bond king Michael Milken and Donald Trump. The creative, artistic, and technology explosion of the first half of the decade became highly commodified and exploited in the latter half. But it often felt like a fun party that everyone could join. The funny thing is, even my friends for whom rock isn't their favorite genre, you play them any 80s rock song and they love it. They know exactly what it is, said 24-year-old singer Diamante, whose new album American Dream, a combination of 2000s pop rock and 80s rock, arrives Friday. It's iconic and never goes out of style. Everyone loves the hits from the 80s, no matter what kind of music you listen to now. That makes sense, given that in some ways we're still living in the 1980s. For many, greed remains good, and we continue to idolize brash, larger-than-life personalities. But the 1980s also allowed Americans to embrace a wider variety of ideas and look to the future with anticipation and hope. As we emerge from the pandemic, that promise continues, though we could use a lot more of the decade's pioneering spirit and less of its corporate agenda. So I kind of like that. I mean, it's not a really insightful article, but the idea that 80s nostalgia has continued on, I've been fascinated by it because the 80s obviously were very formative in my life. I mean, when I think back to my youth, literally I went from being a 13-year-old, actually 12, in the beginning of the 1980s to obviously 22. So I had hugely formative years beginning in junior high school and really ending in college and my first job on a movie set, which is on Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. So Leatherface. So it was a really interesting time, but like I said, I think the thing that I think about the most about the 80s was it was just exciting and stimulating, and worlds were opening up. I mean, for me as a young film fan, the beginning of the 80s, I think most significantly, the home video era had begun, but it didn't really take off until the 80s. I mean, the late 70s, it was interesting, but it was still very niche, even though Laserdiscs were introduced in 1978, believe it or not, and Betamax and VHS had begun, squaring off against one another, but they were still, it really wasn't until the early 80s that a lot of homes started to acquire home video. What that did for me was it turned me into a movie fanatic where I could really start studying movies, because the fact that you could take them home and you could get movies and watch them whenever you want, this was crazy. It was a crazy thing. And it wasn't just that technology, but it was the idea that it all sort of blended together. Like I said before, I mean, I started making the rounds of going to Tower Records every week and going to the video store every week, because you couldn't look online and see what was coming out. No one thought to even do that. There was no place you could look on and say, okay, well, what movies are coming out? You literally had to go to the video store. You had to go to Tower Records, or you had to go somewhere. And it was all very exciting. And you'd be playing music that came from your certain movies or your favorite bands or whatever as you went to the video store. So it was like, okay, you picked up a brand new video, and on the way home, you're playing whatever, you're listening to whatever it was that you loved at that point in time. And music was something that it was definitely a force. And I liked a lot of European music, but it was all really interesting, and it was all diverse. I mean, you could be listening to everything from a hair metal band to Prince to Europop, synthwave, whatever it was you wanted to listen to, but you listened to kind of all of it. Nobody listened really to one genre of music. People that were really into music, there was so much coming out. I mean, there was like the 4AD record label, which was blowing my mind, with bands like 4AD or Beggar's Banquet or something, even Network out of Canada, and you could get everything from, I don't know, going from Skinny Puppy to the Cocteau Twins to Berlin. It's just weird. And bands where I was listening to bands, I first heard The Cult, for instance, and goth music was really interesting. Christian Death and their changing lineup. I mean, there was all kinds of stuff happening, and it was all kind of exciting. You'd be listening to it, and the diversity of pop music was all over the map, and you kind of felt like, you had to be looking into everything to find out. You didn't want to miss anything. The idea that and it wasn't about being hip or being in with the cool crowd. It was more a personal thing. Like for me, I wanted to know, because there was just so many interesting things out there that it was just exciting. There was the excitement. There was my God, I didn't know so much different kinds of pop music existed. I had no idea. And it was just every week you could find something that was stimulating and interesting. And I think in a way there was always something to look forward to. And it was, for me at least, there was an excitement and I guess a joie de vivre that was part of all of it. And the same thing was true of movies. And I always hark back to the summer of 1982. And the summer of 1982 was the culmination of what we'd had in the late 70s with movies coming out like Alien and Star Wars, and the great science fiction and horror films really were starting to pay off, because in a 2-month period of time from May to the end of June in 1982, once again, I'll just say it, I've said it many times on this show, but you had, in basically the span of a month and a half, less than 60 days, Conan the Barbarian, Star Trek II, Poltergeist, E.T., The Road Warrior, Tron, John Carpenter's The Thing, and did I say Blade Runner? All in the same month, or 45 days. And every time you went to the theater, it was like mind-blowing. And some movies were better than the others, of course. And during that time, even like Rocky III opened. And it was just a mind-blowing time where entertainment, it never really let you down. It was just always really exciting and cool. So why is it then that now, years and years, how many years later? I mean, Top Gun, you're looking at, what, almost 35 years, not quite 35 years, but Top Gun Maverick is, I mean, who would have thought that we're going to go see a character that apparently never left the Air Force and is still flying jets for 35 years after we first met him? And I'm excited about it. Why are we watching Cobra Kai? Why is Stranger Things set in the 80s? The Duffer Brothers who created that show probably weren't even born until, what, the mid-90s maybe? It's just a strange thing, and to have lived through it and to see so much of this 80s nostalgia still just here and people looking back at it, it's kind of an interesting way or thing that's going on. But I just think that there was just something happening collectively amongst all of our pop culture that was ultimately, it was fun for the most part. That's the thing that I remember most about the 1980s, is that it was exciting, and kind of everything that I was looking at or interested in, none of it really let you down. And there wasn't much cynicism. I mean, sure, there's always cynicism, especially when you're a teenager. But when I was in high school, everything was kind of exciting. You never knew what was going on because the technological revolutions that were happening, home computing. I mean, we went from, I'd have to cassette tape with my computer program that would take 2 hours to load. That's how the 80s began. And by the end, the computing was pretty sophisticated. And it was pretty amazing to watch the development of computing power and tabletop computers and the beginnings of console systems and the fact that you could carry music around with you and wear headphones and listen to anything you want. I mean, it was pretty exciting. And I have great fondness for it, not just because it was something I lived through, obviously, but just because it was that exciting. It was stimulating. It sort of launched me into adulthood with a huge, big smile on my face, like, it's pretty fucking awesome. Like, there wasn't anything, all the possibilities were there. And maybe that's what I've always believed in, that. Like, you can pretty much do anything you want, within reason. Like, I understand, if you want to become an astronaut, it's probably pretty hard, especially for someone at my age who has had no military experience, no flying experience. I think that ship has sailed. But at least when you were in the 80s, you're a kid in the 80s, you're like, within reason, you could be like, you know what, I could do that. There was never any idea that you couldn't do that. And now with the information age and the technology and the things that we have, it's possible to achieve many, many things that might have been impossible, say, 50 years ago. But it all sort of began in the 80s. To me, the 80s were all about possibility. And going back and, I mean, seeing shows like Cobra Kai, which almost completely rely on the fact that you saw The Karate Kid and that it resonated with you. But most modern audiences, they might have grown up with it on cable, but it's 2021 now. And you're talking, that's quite some time. But it's a very interesting phenomenon, and it keeps getting repeated over and over again. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, the reason we're seeing this stuff now is because it is fun. And not just nostalgia-wise, but there's something about even Cobra Kai now. It's a show that it's it's not afraid to delve into a little bit of darkness. These characters, obviously, there's shades of gray there, but in a way, I find it hopeful. I think the things that came out of the 80s more than anything else were sort of hopeful, and there was the rise of the individual. I mean, when you think about the 80s, it's people that we think about. It's creative forces. It's individuals that made cool things that we follow, whether they're artists. I mean, I remember being a real big fan of Robert Longo. People don't really know who he is anymore, but he directed a New Order video, and he was an illustrator. He also directed the movie Johnny Mnemonic with Keanu Reeves, although maybe the less said about that one, the better. But he was a cool visual artist that worked in film and worked in music video, and also painted big giant or painted images or drew images of falling people. I mean, it was interesting. I went and saw an exhibit, a Robert Longo exhibit at LACMA here in Los Angeles in 1989. I'm like, wow, he was like an artist that I knew, and they brought his exhibition to Los Angeles. And I just thought, well, that was cool, to even have a modern visual stylist or artist that I was a fan of that came to LA. It just added to it all, and it was exciting. And I kind of feel like, in a way, maybe that's why I'm saying we live in a wondrous time when there's lots of great stuff. I think maybe that attitude, my attitude that I'm looking around going, well, this is still cool, it partly comes and was shaped by the fact that I come from the 80s when everything to me was exciting. And I've kind of never lost that, really. And I kind of feel that way now. I mean, we have a lot of excitement happening on many different levels. Technology, we're flying spaceships. I mean, watching the spaceship that Elon Musk fired up, and it goes up and it comes back down. It's essentially a 12-story building. They launch it, it comes out like this and comes down like this and then lands itself. I mean, this is something I never thought would be possible in the gravity well of a planet. And I watched it just the other day. I mean, we're flying helicopters on Mars. Well, drones, but we can get bigger ships up there. I mean, it's amazing what we've got going on. In a way, I kind of feel like maybe the 20s, aside from our global pandemic, that we need to get over. But I don't know. I'm pretty excited. It's all very, very, very good, very exciting. I don't know if people share my enthusiasm for the era, but I think that I'm looking forward to things. I think I have definitely am going into the rest of this decade with eyes open and a full heart. Pasty Coppertop writes in and says, RMB, glad to hear that you are at the infancy stage of joining the community of watch enthusiasts. I would recommend watching The Urban Gentry, hosted by TGV. He has great knowledge, and not only about watches, but horology itself. He has a good way about him, and best of all, he's not a watch snob. He speaks about $15 Casios to $300,000 Philippe Pateks. Anyway, come and join us on this great ride. Well, I have to tell you, so what Pasty is referring to is that suddenly, for whatever reason, I started watching YouTube channels about watches. Richard Millier was the first person. I'd never heard of Richard Millier. I don't know much about watches, and I started watching this YouTube channel, Producer Michael, and he's gone into some shops in New York and here in LA and gone after. I didn't realize that there were watches that people were buying that were hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And it was just one of these things, again, maybe because I find it exciting that people are making these things and that people are still buying watches, and there's still a very vibrant community. So, yeah, it's just another great, hey, I wouldn't have known anything about this without YouTube. And then suddenly you find out, like, wow, there's this whole community of watch enthusiasts, and they're being served on YouTube as well. So what's not to love? Anyway, Pasty Coppertop goes on to say, I think I may piss some people off. But oh well, what are you going to do? I do not understand the whole notion of fans needing a certain color, race, gender, etc. to relate to them in movies, comics, music, or whatever. By my name, I'm sure you can guess what I may look like, so why is it weird that people that I tried to strive to be are nothing like me? I did not have a Larry Bird poster in my room, but rather Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson hung from my walls. My favorite athlete was Bo Jackson. When it came to hockey, I wanted to be like Gretzky or Lemieux. These athletes were different, and I wanted to be like them because they were great at what they did, not because they checked a box. My wife, who is older than me, speaks about how music and comedy in the 80s had no color. Everyone seemed to listen to everything. It was awesome, and music now cannot duplicate the fun and meaning it did then. I agree with you. Like, I didn't, when I became a fanatical Prince fan, I never thought about the fact that, well, he's black, or actually mixed race, and would that have any bearing? No, I liked Prince because he had a lot of great songs about fucking, and they were fucking funky, and that's why I listened to Prince. I really, I loved his grinds, and I loved his grooves, and I loved his voice, and I loved the diversity of music that he played, but it never occurred to me that he was a black artist, I wouldn't listen to it. It didn't matter to me. But I think you're absolutely right. Music and comedy in the 80s, I mean, obviously you're watching Eddie Murphy, but I never thought about Eddie Murphy as a black comedian. I thought of him as Eddie Murphy. And I think that's true. I think your wife is correct. It was awesome, and music now cannot duplicate the fun and meaning it did then. I would agree. I hear both the complaints and cheering when characters are being changed. What I don't hear is a good reason as to why a new character is just not made. I'm guessing the answer is easier to take an existing property and work with that, but is it? Seems like you're pissing true fans off more than bringing new fans in. Robservations number 682 spoke about millennials and film. John Campea speaks to how there are no downside remakes. He says that if a remake turns out good, then great. If it doesn't, you still have the original. This is why I disagree with his opinion. If the remake stinks, most millennials don't even know there was an original and will never watch it because it's too old. The history of film is being lost, much like sports or music. Except with the hardcore fans, many do not know where these things came from or what led to what we have now. Sound familiar? Politics and society? Please, as someone who loves history, can we learn from the past to make a better future? Anyway, sorry about the rant. Next letter will be fun and about entertainment, I promise. Have you seen the series on Netflix called Lupin? I haven't, but I've seen the anime. I do want to go back and look at it. It's a fun French series about a thief. Thanks again for your level-headed commentary, and you, sir, have a better day. Well, Kevin, Pasty Copper Top, thanks for writing in that letter. I think it's a good letter. And obviously, I think your wife kind of nailed it. I mean, there was a certain joie de vivre in the 80s. I mean, even though, yeah, we had Wall Street and we had cocaine and all that. We had Miami Vice, but everything was, I don't know, it just seemed like it was more optimistic than anything else. I don't know why that was, but certainly we had our downsides. The AIDS epidemic was devastating the creative communities, especially in large cities like New York and L.A. I knew one gentleman, a guy named Joe Vigil, who worked for Paramount at the time, and when he announced that he had AIDS, we watched in horror over the course of a couple of months. He was cut to the bone and eventually passed away. So it wasn't all great, so my nostalgia isn't through rose-colored glasses, but interesting times. But in terms of character swapping, on one hand, we're now going through a period of time where there's all of this representation, and everybody, I think representation is important, but I don't just think race or gender swapping existing characters is necessarily the best thing, because immediately the question arises, why are you doing this? If you want to see more people have more representation, whether it's a certain ethnic group or whether it's LGBTQ representation, trans representation, whatever, why not go back and create new characters that can themselves become iconic? I've always believed, look, I have no problem with anybody who wants to make a black Superman movie. Doesn't bother me at all. Just make the movie good and make the character great. That's all I care about. But then the thing that I think is odd and that is problematic is then why did you do it in the first place? Is there something inherent to gender or color swapping a character that's going to add to your story? In which case I would say fine. But if you just retell the story of Kal-El and the story of Superman and casting a black lead and don't do something with the fact that the character is black, which is the whole reason you wanted to swap the character in the first place. And I have to say, I've heard more often than not, especially from black friends of mine, I think if you were to poll them, the people that I personally know, I keep hearing that they would rather have new and original characters that are black from the get-go. That it really does seem like pandering tokenism when you take an already established character and change their race. That it isn't really fair to the group that you want to see represented, that you're not giving them an original new character. I mean, it's and I mean, I don't know. I'm not black myself, obviously, so I can't speak to what the community as a whole would probably want, but I know that when you give the black community or the gay community or whatever community you're talking about, if you give them characters, good characters, new characters, breakthrough characters that they can like and uphold, that's what kind of representation people want. They want to see people that reflect them, but not something that you've just, oh, well, this character is already established, so let's just make them gay or make them black or make them Asian American or make them indigenous peoples, First Nation, whatever you want to call it. Let's just go make them that way. People aren't dumb. I think they feel the tokenistic vibe when that happens, and I don't think it's good. I think what you want to do is you want to create breakthrough characters like Pasty Coppertop said. You know what? If you liked Michael Jordan, it was because Michael Jordan was a magician. You know, one of the greatest basketball players who ever lived. And if you were a basketball fan, you put him on your wall because you loved Michael Jordan. It didn't matter what color he was, but he was one of the best that ever played that sport ever. Even to this day, people think about Jordan and you're like, okay, LeBron James is great too, but Michael Jordan, there was something legendary about him. And I think anybody that likes sports, you know, if you like sports and you're interested in that, whatever arena of sports you want, when you see greatness, it doesn't matter what color that person is. It just matters that they're great. And you can uphold and admire their ability. I mean, that's what it's all about, isn't it? That you celebrate their ability to be great. And I think human beings, when it comes to that, I think when we see anybody excelling in whatever their field is, we like that. I mean, sure, maybe the people that also want to get into that field might be jealous, but ultimately, don't you want to... I think we as human beings, I think we actually, more often than not, if we see somebody and our interests don't collide with theirs, you can't help but admire people that are great at what they do. I mean, you think, sure, I wish I could be like that, but still you have to admire it more so than feel jealous or something like that. But I'd like to believe that most people are supportive of other people's endeavors. Like I've always said, it doesn't matter how good somebody else is. It doesn't make you any better or any worse. And I got that from the movie Pastime, directed by Robin Armstrong, and I believe it. It's sort of one of my guiding philosophies of life. Ruben Hilbers is here. Ruben says, Rob, you have ranted against modern Trek, and I've made no secret of the fact that I'm not a fan either. At the same time, the writing on Doctor Who is also tanked, and in my humble opinion, the less said about the disaster that is the Star Wars sequel trilogy, the better. Long story short, the sci-fi board needs a game changer, something that will have all these shows for breakfast, because it has humor, good stories, and great characters, and that game changer should be called Stargate. If SG-1 came out today, it would wipe the floor with all of those shows, but especially Discovery. And yes, I know that some people don't like Stargate Universe, but like a fine wine, it has gotten better with age, especially Season 2. Finally, Twin Destinies is one of the best episodes, but I still don't believe that it was a fluke of physics that threw Rush back in time. Cough. Hand of Omega. Cough. Anyway, can I get some love for Stargate? Regards, Ruben. Well, you know what, Ruben? A couple months back, I watched some Stargate. I'd never seen it. Total blind spot in my fandom. and I was watching the first season of Stargate SG-1. I liked it. I thought it was pretty good. I really enjoyed it. I mean, obviously, I'd have to watch a lot more Stargate to really get a holistic approach to that franchise, but I liked the movie, and I know that the show doesn't have much. I mean, it is a direct continuation of the movie, really, but I liked it. I thought it was great, and I thought it was pretty good science fiction, and I was definitely intrigued to see where it would go. But again, there was a lot of Stargate. What did it run? Like there's Stargate Atlantis, Stargate Universe. A lot of Stargate out there. Maybe somebody could reboot it and make it new. I have to say that I think that, again, I think The Expanse is really great because it's based on a series of books. The Boys is great because it's based on comics. Invincible, the new animated series, great because it was also based on comics. I think the most successful shows today lately are those that already have the storylines mapped out, and the people adapting the material know where they're going. It's been very interesting to watch Game of Thrones. We are literally, I stopped the 9th episode of season 6, the Battle of the Bastards. We stopped right before the battle started this morning. And what I find really interesting watching Game of Thrones is you can actually watch the show. I mean, I think it's pretty classic up through season 5, even though the story in Bravos with Arya, it's kind of like, well, where does that go? And season 6 is still pretty good, but it's wobbly. It ends really strong, though, obviously, however. But then there's no more books to adapt. So I really think what I find strange is that when left to their own devices, obviously Weiss and Benioff, I don't understand how they didn't see what made that show great was just the level of sophistication. I was talking to Elizabeth about this, about how one of the great things about Game of Thrones was it never romanticized anyone or anything. If it could subvert the romanticization of a character, it would. And that's what made it so incredible. And like if I had made that show, I was talking about the fact that that one of the big, I mean, not to belabor the point or get off on a tangent really, but one of the things about, and you forget how the White Walkers are this looming threat from the very first episode, the Whites, and it literally goes nowhere. This relentless force north of the wall, once they destroy the wall and they come south, they don't do anything. Sure, there's the Battle of Winterfell, but I would be hard pressed to say that they wouldn't have just walked on by. Like if there was nobody home at Winterfell, they might have checked it out or whatever, but why bother? And it's always been strange to me that you're watching this show and all of these, Daenerys' journey and all that, I do not understand. But the writing of the shows is where these shows live and die. And I feel that the people that are writing genre shows now, just as I've said before, they don't have the background in the very genre they're working in. The writing in Star Trek seems like, I don't know, they haven't watched Star Trek. They don't understand classic science fiction, which is probably because they don't. The writers are not people that were necessarily perusing science fiction. I feel all they've done is watch TV shows and movies, and they got everything they know about writing from those things without having a real background in what real science fiction is. And I think the Star Wars, Doctor Who, and Star Trek, I think have all suffered from the same problem, in that we're getting science fiction shows or things that really have no science fiction in them, and it seems very strange. But Stargate, definitely something I jumped into, and I liked it. So I want to thank you, Ruben, for writing in about Stargate, because man, people love that shit. They love that stuff. James Alquist writes in. Ooh, my favorite kind of letter. Good day to you, Mr. Burnett. My name is James Alquist, and this is the first letter I'm writing to you. Before I get into my topic, I just want to say how important your voice is during these divisive times, especially among fandoms. I first discovered you on Collider Heroes and have occasionally watched you during your appearance on the channel. Your takes on the many different types of fandom are so incredibly nuanced, it's made me a more open-minded individual when addressing problems within my own fandom, as much as I would like. I don't know what it's a sentence that goes nowhere. It says, as much as I would like to praise your, and then nothing. And then the next paragraph is, when I was 5 years old in 1997, I discovered 3 VHS tapes at a family friend's home that stole my heart and mind ever since. There was a painted face on each VHS cover, which was Darth Vader, a stormtrooper, and Yoda, which painfully drove my father mad because I watched all 3 movies on that day. As I grew older, my love for it grew as the prequels released, and I dove into the expanded universe. When the prequels were coming out, they were receiving a lot of criticism and sometimes pure hatred. As a child, I defended them relentlessly from anyone that I found being negative towards them, even if it was fair criticism. As I grew up, I was able to see some of those flaws, predominantly the acting, and when I first brought that up to my circle of friends, I was told, well, Star Wars is for children and not for us. I hated this statement. I only knew one other person who has said it before, and that was George Lucas. I felt like I wasn't allowed to address Star Wars for its flaws while still loving its strengths. After that moment, I wanted to hear and learn more from people who didn't like them because I wanted their voices to be heard. After gathering some criticisms and vetting them with what I agreed or disagreed with, I would go back to my friends and present it to them. Some of them would listen, while I would be dismissed once again, except this time being told, well, I guess you're just too old for Star Wars now. It was shortly after Revenge of the Sith and I was a teenager, not a full-grown adult, and this drove me mad internally. At this point, I felt like I wasn't allowed to be a fan anymore, and the worst part is I bought into it. For roughly 5 years, I didn't engage in Star Wars talk again until around 2010. I joined the Army after graduating high school, and my first roommate, Tom, asked me if I liked Star Wars, and with enthusiasm I said yes. After talking for hours about some of our favorite things from the originals, prequels, and the expanded universe, we began talking about criticisms. And I was hesitant, but when I told him about how I couldn't be a fan anymore, he told me, fuck that. George Lucas is wrong when he says Star Wars is for children. It's not for children, it's for the child in every one of us. I totally agree, 100%. My mind was blown. I'd never thought of that before, and all of a sudden, I felt okay to be a Star Wars fan again. For years, I was rediscovering Star Wars. I was reading the Young Jedi Knight books, discovering the Yuuzhan Vong War in the New Jedi Order, and playing every game that has a Star Wars label on it. When Disney announced a new trilogy was coming out, starting in 2015, I was hyped, to say the least, except this time I reminded myself not to let my love for Star Wars interfere with approaching it honestly. I was on my last deployment in the Army when The Force Awakens came out, and thankfully I wasn't in a combat zone this time, and I had an internet connection where I watched a Spanish bootleg at least 10 times when I had time off. Shame on you. It wasn't a perfect movie and had plenty of flaws, but it captured the feeling of Star Wars, and I was hyped for the second movie. In 2017, when The Last Jedi came out, I experienced for the first time what it was like to actually hate a movie for my fandom. I hid my dislike for it, though, because I didn't want to hate it, so I went through hell to tell people that I liked it. However, no matter what I did to try and convince myself, I couldn't. I was living a lie. Because I love Star Wars so much, I had to be honest with myself and everyone around me. I was hoping to start having honest conversations with fans who loved and hated it so I could understand multiple perspectives yet again. This time, the environment was so toxic, hardly anyone would talk to anyone outside of their team. I was told repeatedly that Star Wars is for children, get over it, or you're not allowed to be a fan because it's for children, go home, boomer, and other horrible words I've never been called before. My love disappeared. I believed my fandom died. My energy for the fandom went dry, and I had come to the conclusion Star Wars died with The Last Jedi. I got rid of everything Star Wars related for free. I didn't even sell it. I didn't care for the release of The Rise of Skywalker. I just wanted to see it so I could have a proper funeral for my fandom. I had a feeling Disney would throw everything some crazy fans would want in the movie to make us happy, and damn was I right. It's not a good movie at all, but I realized something after watching it. I couldn't give up on my fandom. I loved Star Wars, and with the lack of people trying to bring people together, and have hard conversations with our fandom. I wanted to help bridge that gap. I want people to learn what I learned 11 years ago, and that Star Wars isn't just for children. Star Wars is for the child that is in us, who saw the VHS covers and played them nonstop. The teenager who wanted to learn more about other fans' critiques, or the adult who wants to watch a story from a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away for the 100th time. Thank you for reading my letter, and I hope I didn't go off the rails too much. I hope we as fans can appreciate our differences more so than being at each other's throats. Have a wonderful day, and I look forward to hearing from you. Best regards, James Alquist. Well, James, what a great letter. I mean, to me, like, I still have this. And this is, of course, my Japanese. This is the first Japanese letterboxed version of Star Wars. Most people consider that the color transfer of this disc is, in fact, the best Star Wars ever looked on home video. People use it as a reference in terms of a color reference. And when I look at this, I mean, Star Wars meant a great deal to me. To me, this is the perfect encapsulation, whereas the Japanese took this and turned this into this amazing CAV Star Wars set that I love, and of course got this. I think this came out in 87. I think these came out in 87. I'd like to say 87. But to me, Star Wars is 2 movies. That's it. Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. Everyone knows that I was tremendously disappointed by Return of the Jedi. As a film, I love the conflict between Luke and the Emperor and Vader. I do like the swashbuckling rescue of Han Solo, but the rest of the movie is kind of either exposition or sort of needless. I feel it's kind of a big letdown. I felt it was a letdown the day I saw it. I was like, really? I mean, the middle section of that movie, all that matters is getting Han Solo back and then the confrontation with Luke, the Emperor, and Vader. I wish the rest of the movie resonated and was important, but it really isn't. I mean, yeah, there's set pieces and things like that, but you don't really need any of it. You know, it's filler. Whereas I think Star Wars and Empire are 2 of the finest examples of fantasy filmmaking ever. So I understand what you're saying. I mean, I still love Star Wars, but I just feel that it's never been up to par with those 2 movies. And the reason being, I think, is the people that you had working on them. You know, they were people of a different era, a different time. George Lucas, when he made The Phantom Menace, he was out of touch, man. He become so super famous in the between 1977 and 1997, when the Star Wars special editions came out. I mean, he lost, in his mind, he believes that, oh yeah, these movies were for children. But like you said in your letter, and like I've said a million times, they were made for everybody. They were for the children in all of us. I think that was the thing about Star Wars, is that it captivated everyone. Not just kids. Obviously, kids were the target audience, sure. But adults loved it too. That's why it became such a pop culture phenomenon. Everybody loved Star Wars. No one had ever seen anything like it. And now, when you've seen so much like it, you've seen the universe, you're familiar with the universe, the one thing that you can do, which I think they have yet to do, is tell a great story. The idea of the fall of Anakin Skywalker could have been a great story, but it's not well told. I've often said that the prequel trilogy is they're bad movies, but they're good Star Wars. And what you need Star Wars to be truly great. They have to be good movies and great Star Wars. The storyline for the prequels is good, but the execution is so stilted, and it's very difficult to watch. But hey, I'm still a fan like you. I like The Mandalorian. Hope springs eternal, but you know, I'd like to see better Star Wars, better Star Trek, better Doctor Who. I don't know if that's possible now, though. We'll see. Gavin Dunleavy writes in. Gavin Dunleavy says, "Hey there, Rob. I just want to start by saying that hearing you read my first letter was everything I needed and then some. I laughed, I cried, and my smile reached from ear to ear the entire time. I didn't know reading a letter could have that effect on you. Thank you for taking the time to interact with imagination connoisseurs such as yourself. P.S. I'm going to hold you to that Toys R Us trip. In my first letter, I told you I had only started the Amazon Prime series Them due to your recommendation. I was only 3 episodes in, but a day after I sent that letter, I'd binged the entirety of Season 1. All I can say is that it was one of the most intense and intelligent series I've seen in a very long time. Not to dive too deep into spoiler territory, but the designs of the ghosts or hauntings were so fascinating to me, especially Henry's haunting. They aren't your typical scary ghosts. They are significant symbols that represent a specific type of horror. Not jump scare horror, but something along the lines of historical horror. The fear doesn't necessarily come only from the look of these hauntings, but their meaning and context. I love when horror is subtle and smart, not shoved in your face, although them kind of did both. I felt that the ending wrapped up everything very nicely and even offered a glimmer of hope with the closing song and shot. I thoroughly enjoyed the show, and I was pumped to hear that a season 2 had been confirmed. From what I've read, it seems that this series will be an anthology and focus on a different family for the next season. I think this is a very smart choice, and it only excites me more. Me too. I also wanted to add that I'm in the middle of watching Robservations number 683, and it seems the chain of recommendations passes down through the geek singularity. I heard Black Phillip Alvarez had wrote in talking about my letter and how it convinced him to give the show a try. I can't even explain how hyped this made me. I was fist-pumping the air saying, "Hell yeah, Phillip!" Much like you, Rob, I get a wee bit salty when someone doesn't like media I've recommended. But I'm so glad that someone was able to hear my amateur review and have it convince them to try something new. This is why the Post-Geek Singularity is the best community of people I've come across on the internet. It's all about sharing, loving, and caring about geeky stuff. Once again, I can't thank you enough for everything you do, Rob. I'll hopefully be writing back soon to give you my initial thoughts on the original Legends of the Galactic Heroes, and I'm looking forward to new recommendations. Until then, I wish you all the best. Gavin. What a lovely letter, Gavin. Thank you for the kind words, sir. But I think you touched on something that, maybe it was in the back of my mind, but I didn't really even know that I was doing this. But this community that we're building really is, I think, the best on YouTube. I mean, we now joke about it because I've given everybody enough catchphrases. Post-Geek Singularity, together we are one. Call it whatever you want. I love those catchphrases because it's fun. Look, one of the reasons I have all those intros that people have hung on me at the beginning is to show you right away that I don't take myself as seriously. I mean, you can't throw out all those nicknames without, it's kind of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like, I don't really believe I'm all these things, but it's kind of fun, and they all came from viewers. So building a community has been part of the thing that's the most fun about this channel, is having, you, imagination connoisseurs, you viewers participate, interact. I think that's something unique to this channel as well. Not just, while I do appreciate everybody supporting the channel with super chats and tips and all that, you can always tip me, as you know, people listening, or send me super chats to interact live on the air, and I'll read your questions and all that, but it's not necessary. That's why people can write in letters. I feel that I thought that was actually important to read. I used to love, in the back of comic books, reading letters of comment, and you'd see that there were people that would write in multiple letters, and you kind of get to know them through their letters, and I like that. It really bummed me out when they took letters of comment out of comic books. It made the experience of reading comic books a little less fun for me, because I loved hearing what other people thought of the comic book stories. Because when I was growing up, it wasn't like I had friends that were big comic book devotees, and I'm reading, I want to talk to somebody. Like, I remember the Born Again storyline, the Frank Miller storyline, when he came back to Daredevil and Matt Murdock's tenement collapses and Matt Murdock finds the Daredevil costume, and he knew that Kingpin was behind it. Then I was like, no way! Like, I couldn't call up anybody and talk to them about it. Be like, oh my God, did you read the last issue of Daredevil? So that's kind of what I like this community to be, a community. We all talk about what we love. I mean, that's definitely the very basis. So thank you for writing in. What a fine letter. Thank you so much. I have actually, hang on, I'm going to Enterprise H NCC 1701H writes in and says, Killer of Klingons, greetings. First, would you happen to have watched a Let's Play of the game Star Trek Generations? Man, you've been writing, Enterprise H has been talking about me watching this gameplay for a long time. First, would you happen to have watched a Let's Play of the game Star Trek Generations? And if so, could I have your thoughts on it? I have not. I know I should. Secondly, I watched a Let's Play of the DS9 game, The Fallen, a while back. Spoilers will follow for anyone who cares about a game released in 2000. If this game's depiction of them is to be believed, then Starfleet officers are better trained than clone commandos from the game Star Wars Republic Commando. They must be able to do dozens of pull-ups for the stuff that they do here. I have to say that I noticed a lot of killing. Not that I'm opposed to violence, especially in video games, but it did strike me as oddly gruesome how the protagonists never got killed in cutscenes, even though they had no qualms about killing their foes. It fits the Dominion's MO to capture rather than kill, but please explain to me why the Obsidian Order only knocks out Sisko and Odo and then beams in a bunch of killers they know will be lost. It's not like the game clarifies that there's some sort of system of reciprocity in place where both sides agreed to set phasers on stun. This growing awareness peaked when, after Sisko, Kira, and Worf went through the great pains to infiltrate an Obsidian Order base, only for the main guy to beam into the room of their mission objective and not bother to kill or stun anyone, despite Sisko vowing to stop him. The best part is perhaps if a certain character had been killed or stunned, then Sisko would have no clue how to stop the main bad guy, and Deep Space Nine would have been destroyed. Contrasting this to my favorite Star Trek game, the main antagonists leave the heroes alive, but they also can't just beam back out. For a final point, I don't recall if you ever gave your opinion on the PA Wraiths as antagonists. Anyway, this game is certainly not going to improve your opinion of them. Enterprise H, NCC 1701H. Well, Enterprise H, I haven't played that game. But, I think one of the problems with turning Star Trek into a video game, and I know Star Trek Online is there, it's that when you've got to have, in video games, to make them interesting, you've got to have opponents and bad guys and shooting and running around and things that are interesting. You can't just sit on the bridge of a starship and navigate your way through space. I mean, I guess you can if you wanted to make it like No Man's Sky or something. But by definition, they have to turn it into something that you're going to, whether it's a first-person shooter or you're going to go to war or something. I get that. That's not really that Star Trekian, but if you want to put it in the context of a video game, you don't really have much choice, unfortunately, which is kind of a bummer. But I get it. But again, I have not played that game, so I don't know. And one day I'm gonna watch your Generations playthrough. I promise. I swear. This one comes from Hunter. Hunter says, "Hi, Rob. So recently, Glenn Close did an interview with Entertainment Weekly and Variety to promote her new jazz album that she did with Ted Nash. During both of these interviews, she has expressed interest in playing Cruella for a third movie. In the interview, she says, I have a great story to make another Cruella with my Cruella. Her pitch is that Cruella comes to New York and disappears down the sewers. I find this interesting. The last time we saw Glenn Close play this iconic villain was in the movie 102 Dalmatians, which was released in theaters on November 22nd during the Thanksgiving season back in 2000. Although a ton of time has passed since 102 Dalmatians was released, depending on how well the new Cruella movie with Emma Stone does with its day-and-date release in theaters and on Disney Plus with Premier Access, do you think that Disney could actually greenlight a third Cruella movie with Glenn Close in the role? And if they did that, would you even be interested in watching it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. P.S. Trivia fact, the live-action version of The Grinch with Jim Carrey opened in theaters on November 17th, which was 5 days prior to 102 Dalmatians opening in theaters. Plus, Unbreakable opened the same day as 102 Dalmatians. The three of them went up against each other. According to Box Office Mojo, The Grinch took first place, making $73,523,665. Unbreakable took in second, making $30,330,771, and 102 Dalmatians took third place, making $26,236,096. That's interesting. What I want to say, I love Glenn Close. And what I want to see, I mean, I always saw those movies as being more for kids, whereas Cruella looks like more of an adult movie. I wouldn't mind seeing her. I'd see it. Sure, why not? Why not? I would watch that. Or maybe they could do a hybridized version where you've got old Cruella and you've got modern Cruella, and maybe you could do some kind of a flashback story about both of them, or a long story where you see Cruella at different steps or different points in her life or something like that. But I would definitely watch another Cruella movie. Sure, why not? Omar94. Omar writes another letter. Hi, Rob, moderators in the Post-Geek Singularity. Something about that article you read about millennials and old movies made me realize how the same type of thing happens when it comes to TV shows. What I mean is how millennials don't really watch older shows anymore, similar to old movies. There are many great shows now which are older, but they're still really good, and perhaps even better than the shows coming out, like I Love Lucy, The Twilight Zone, Perry Mason, The Dick Van Dyke Show, The Andy Griffith Show, The Mary Tyler Moore Show, Gilligan's Island, All in the Family, and many others. Can you imagine millennials and Gen Z watching All in the Family? They would be shocked and triggered. I'm a millennial, and I've seen and liked these older shows, but not many people my age will see them due to the fact that they're older. As much as young people like modern shows now, like Better Call Saul, A Good Place, Stranger Things, and all the shows on TV and streaming services, I do think there's a little bit of a lament because they don't watch older shows. Thanks, and live long and prosper. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, look, I grew up, and I wouldn't be who I am without The Twilight Zone, and which is all in black and white, same as the original Outer Limits. I mean, I love those shows. And, of course, modern Star Trek, and I grew up with a lot of other things, too, like the ones you mentioned. But I think, people like things of their time. There's so much out there now, it's hard to catch up. But I do think people, if you looked into the past, that you would, in fact, find things that you would like. Clearly that you have, which I think is a good thing. Because I think there's a lot of good stuff. Speaking of things in the past, Pedro Ferreira is here. Pedro Ferreira. Our old friend, Pedro. This is pretty great. Pedro writes in, Knight Rider, 2010, and its relevance today. Pedro says, I sometimes feel there is snobbery in looking back at the past and seeing how something made years ago could be relevant today. After all, the past rarely predicts the future, so it might be outdated, right? I don't generally think that way, although I know I'm in the minority. Having said that, what possible relevance could a forgotten part of the Knight Rider franchise have today? I remember when I first watched 1991's Knight Rider 2000, how disappointed I was with a complete lack of Pontiac and its dark future. It was a betrayal to me. It felt like everything Michael Knight had done in the original 80s TV series had been for nothing. Over time and a number of times, rewatching of Knight Rider 2000 has made me reevaluate the film, and now I think it's quite underrated. The same might not be said of 94's Knight Rider 2010, which up until recently I refused to watch as its place in fandom is almost non-existent. Needless to say, its premiere was met with little enthusiasm. Now, okay, Pedro, there was a Knight Rider in 2000 that was set, or in 1991 there was Knight Rider 2000, and you were disappointed with the lack of Pontiac. And then there was Knight Rider 2010, which was made in 1994, which up until recently I refused to watch as its place in fandom is almost non-existent. I didn't realize there was a much Knight Rider fandom at all. I mean, I do have a friend that actually has the Knight Rider car, so shout out to Dave Rogers, but all right. Needless to say, its premiere was met with little enthusiasm. What we got was no Hoff, no William Daniels kit, no turbo boost, and a script produced by Rob Cohen, who's an okay director depending on what sympathy you can find. But don't worry, guys, the film has a Mad Max-style future, a plot involving smuggling Mexicans and a monster truck. Well, what's wrong with that? Yeah, you can't forget the monster truck. Plus, it has Brian James playing a robotic humanoid like he did in Blade Runner, except almost completely against type, and rather refreshingly, as the complete opposite of the personality spectrum. As you can see, none of this inspired confidence at the time in viewers hoping for some Pontiac chasing action led by Mitch Buchanan. To give you an idea of Knight Rider 2010's place in history, 2 spin-offs, Team Knight Rider, which ran from 97 to 98, but more specifically, the 2008 series Knight Rider, are so lambasted that to this day, any news of a reboot is immediately met with caution, especially with the later spin-off's reputation. In comparison, people don't even remember Knight Rider 2010 enough to hate it. That's what we're dealing with here, folks. Well, I didn't know anything about it either. Its origins are interesting and require a look back at television strategies Universal was using at the time. Knight Rider 2010 was supposed to act as a pilot for a possible TV series as part of Universal's Action Pack. Now, for those unaware, the Action Pack was a U.S. syndicated 2-hour block of action entertainment consisting of TV movies and later TV shows produced by Universal, and it lasted from 1994 to 2001. It was an attempt to either revive or create new properties through popular genre entertainment in the hope they could be turned into a full television series. Basically, the TV movies were trial runs to gauge interest from viewers and investors. MCA started with groups of TV movies, among others, based off Midnight Run and Smokey and the Bandit with obviously recasted characters. Surely people had had enough Bandit by this point. Anyway, unsurprisingly, these weren't a success. However, slightly later, 2 priorities fared better. One, based on a novel series by William Shatner called Tech War, got made into a full series, written, directed, and starring Shatner himself. The second, a more modern take on the Hercules mythology, did terrifically well, which led to a full series called Hercules, The Legendary Journeys, which of course in turn led to the equally successful Xena Warrior Princess. I guess Hercules had to start somewhere, and the initial TV movies were actually pretty good, so that was a win. A point to note is that Knight Rider 2010 features Hudson Leek, who a year later became famous among genre fans for playing Callisto in Xena. Going back to the Midnight Run revival, 4 TV movies were originally supposed to air back-to-back in 1994, produced by director Rob Cohen. The producer-director was just coming off the back of the very successful biopic Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, and was seen as a safe pair of hands. This was before Cohen became known for the dubious quality of his films, a sort of Michael Bay of stunt movies. Cohen got 3 Midnight Run TV movies made, but couldn't get a 4th done. His lead star, Christopher McDonald, had committed to a feature film. As a replacement, Cohen took on reviving the Knight Rider franchise with direction by Sam Pillsbury from a script by John Leakey, the latter of which began with a script that more closely followed the TV series. More on that soon. Now, keep in mind, if Glenn Larson himself couldn't reboot Knight Rider successfully, Cohen's version would have to be flippin' turbo boost ski super pursuit mode excellent to regain people's trust in the franchise. Is there really something that has turbo boost ski super pursuit mode in it? And it doesn't take the processing power of Kit to figure out it wasn't. The Knight Rider 2010 reboot is indeed its own thing, for better or worse. In the post-apocalyptic future of 2010, I know the whole future presented here is inaccurate, but that date still makes me feel old. Civilization has now moved out of cities like LA. Everyone now lives in zones, both rich and poor. Most of the poor travel the empty roads trying to make do while dreaming of living in the utopia of a new city that lies protected underneath a massive dome. Jake McQueen, played by Richard Joseph Paul, has made a living of illegally transporting immigrants to the city until his foster brother Marshall Will McQueen captures him. Getting a job working for a computer design company called the Chrysalis Company, Jake finds himself haunted by its corrupt head, Jared, for body organs. This sounds terrible. His only hope is Hannah Tyree, an old flame who designs video games, as well as a couple of friends who all want to take Jared down. I'm going to reveal the whole plot, spoilers, so you've been warned. The cast is comprised of a mixture of fairly known and unknown actors, although they all do a reasonable job considering the material. Richard Joseph Paul is actually not bad as the selfish rogue who begins to see more in life than making profit, but while the script gives him some smart, witty lines, Paul is no David Hasselhoff. Wow, man, I don't know what even that means. Leek in the role of Hannah equally makes a likable, smart character come to life. The chemistry between her and Paul isn't as developed as it should be due to the running time of the movie, but sometimes it works well. Rounding out the characters, Beach does what he can with his Marshall role and brings a good camaraderie between him and Paul, which is important as they're supposed to be brothers. Beach is often fighting the uphill struggle of being that guy in TV and film who's playing an authority figure that has to make up excuses for every illegal thing the hero does. Speaking of heroes, Nicky Katt plays Johnny, a wannabe hero who has a fascination with old guitars. His legend grows appropriately, while Don McManus' Dean is responsible for providing all the souped-up vehicles, although doesn't mind selling out Jake if a big payday is on the cards. As I said, generally the cast is quite good here, although the real star of Knight Rider 2010 is certainly Brian James as Jared. At first seen as a disease-stricken, incapacitated person, Jared soon reveals himself to be almost 100% robotic. In trying to tie himself to cyberspace, he's lost mobility everywhere in his body. Every ounce of his humanity is gone. When he asks Hannah to kiss him on the cheek, he shivers with pleasure as though that's the only area of his body he can feel anything in. He uses Hannah to get to Jake so he can steal his organs, and he sees a stronger man in Jake and therefore a more viable specimen to continue his charade of appearing human. It's a completely different take on playing an android by Brian going from the from the hired hitman with a low IQ of Blade Runner to the intelligent but completely unhinged scientist he plays here. He lies back in his chair and speaks as though he suffered a stroke. James's voice is of course different as well. It really isn't what you're expecting from him, and it's great to see this range in the actor. Jared is ultimately a tragic character, as is Mark Pellegrino's Robert Lee, who comes across as a bully 1 minute, but is helpless to deny his boss, Jared, parts of his own body. To his credit, writer John Leakey is great at writing these characters, but at the expense of spending time exploring the world he's created. The script is pretty unambitious, with Jared's ultimate goal of stealing Jake's mind more a personal one than something that has far-reaching consequences for the entire world. And yet you are spending all this time writing about it. It does beg the question, why, out of all the properties Rob Cohen could have took on, why another reboot of Knight Rider, and why in this way? What drove, no pun intended, people away from Knight Rider 2010? Was its complete lack of resemblance to the source material? At a glance, you might think it's Knight Rider in name only. And they thought it was until I did research. Remember when I said Knight Rider 2010 was originally more in line with the TV series? An original draft of the script had Leak's character called Kat. That was changed at the behest of the studio, who were worried audiences might rightly come to the conclusion she was supposed to be Kit. So as a result, this movie has no ties to the TV series at all. What it does become apparent by the end credits, if you ever get that far, is that apart from the idea of having a computer program installed into a car as an interface, there isn't anything at all to tie it to the original 80s series. You can't even say it's one man making a difference, since Jake ends up having to rope in all of his buddies to stop Jared. With the direction by Sam Pillsbury as competent, if not inspiring, within a television movie budget, it's probably the best one who could have hoped for at the time. An overriding theme of Knight Rider 2010 is nostalgia. From Jake and Hannah's past romance to Johnny's dislike of electronic music compared to guitar music, Jake and Will's reminiscing of growing up together, the movie carries this idea of wishing for things were like the old days. Jake's indifference to computers shows a lack of wanting to embrace future technology. The film definitely takes a "it's not as good as it used to be" approach, which is both snobbish but also a valid point when you consider the outcry for audiences today wanting something as good as they used to watch. The car that Jake ultimately uses by the end of the movie is a custom-built Ford Mustang. Forgetting the car jumping or super speeds built into the original 80s car, the only thing this car can do is shoot at other cars. That's it. But then we get the monster truck driven by Johnny, and everything's almost okay again. It pretty much destroys anything it comes across, and the stunts make the most of showing how powerful it is. It certainly breathes life into the movie whenever it shows up. With all the super cool vehicles on display, thanks to Jake's friend Dean, as well as Rob Cohen's love of fast cars, it started to dawn on me, was Knight Rider 2010 influential or indirectly responsible for the 2001 movie The Fast and the Furious? It sounds like a stretch. Before this, Cohen had produced Midnight Run TV movies, which also had a car chasing, but in Knight Rider 2010, edges it with having a fairly young cast taking on both sides of the law and bad guys in cool cars. The only thing missing is the illegal street racing, but apart from that, there are a number of similarities between both movies. Going back to what I said at the beginning of this article in reflection of Knight Rider 2010 is surprisingly more relevant now than back in '94 for mainly two reasons. I've already mentioned how the theme nostalgia the movie carries seems relevant today, but one is for its technological aspects. As I said, it borrows its setting from Mad Max, but combines that with the dystopian vision of computers chipping away at us until there's nothing left that makes us human. As with the airing of Channel 4's sci-fi thriller Kiss Me First, we have its fake tie-in product, the Azana band, a device that hooks around your neck like a collar, stimulating pleasure and pain while playing video games. The Azana band turned out to be fake, in this crazy tech future we live in, it sure fooled me. But seeing the response to the fake ad on YouTube was worrying. People wanted this. In Knight Rider 2010, the Asna Band itself is a headset that transfers your consciousness from to cyberspace. It's been designed by Jared and Hannah to perhaps one day allow the total transference of the human soul to what we more commonly now call as the internet. The film, however, can't settle on whether advances into cybernetics and transferring one's consciousness into cyberspace is right or wrong. Jared himself is a cautionary tale of losing one's soul to cyberspace, but through Hannah's eventually transference of her crystal prism, it seems to be an exciting path of possibilities. Either way, the positive reaction to the fake Asna Band means it's only a matter of time before such a device is made for real. Let us hope that these are the ones to have control over it, and responsibly. The second point is its views on immigration having some resemblance to what's going on today in America. In Knight Rider 2010's future of Jake smuggling Mexicans into the city, we today have Donald Trump asking for a wall to be built around American borders to prevent Mexicans from entering. Knight Rider 2010 doesn't have a wall around its rich city. Instead, it has a dome. The film very much emphasizes how Mexicans dream about entering a city. It is sold as a haven of opportunity. People that have lived there on the other side see it as having sold themselves out to their non-technological roots. Living outside the dome is pure life, if a poor one. No doubt Trump will be successful in one day building a complete wall, but to see an approximation of that on screen is nevertheless scary. Just to be clear, in no way am I defending Knight Rider 2010 as being good TV. It has many problems, the main being it should never have been called Knight Rider in the first place. But as it stands by itself, it remains an interesting film about the possibilities yet limits of humanity and technology. The film also proves we need not be dependent on relating current films of today with social current issues to speak relevance in our lives, as past movies often do that as well, sometimes by accident. Well, I have to say, Pedro, this is the longest letter I've ever read about Knight Rider 2010. My God, I felt I've learned more about it. I certainly don't ever have to see the series, but I want to thank you for writing in. I love when people get all passionate on me, and which is amazing. So there you go. Again, let's see where you all are at now. How's it going out there? We shall see. I'll see what you guys are saying. J. Robert Oppenheimer says, I am become J.J. Abrams, the destroyer of franchises. I see what you did there, and I agree. So thanks for that. I am become death. Willow Yang. Willow is here. Willow says, I initially wasn't interested in watching Invincible because I thought the animation looked kind of cheap. I thought so too. I finished the first season over the weekend and absolutely loved it. Do you think the series would have worked as a live action? Oh, I would love to have seen it as live action. It would have been horribly expensive to make, I think, because of all the visual effects. But I thought Invincible was great. Great adaptation. I really liked it a lot. But yeah, I could have seen it in live action. Certainly more people would have been talking about it. But yeah, it could absolutely be live action. For sure, I would love to have seen that. I liked Invincible a lot. I hope you did too, Willow. Terrier Tiberius Mork says, hey, Robert, you hunk. I can't stop laughing at your showing of the Gandalf figure. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. The ferns. Yeah, it was pretty funny. That Gandalf figure that he's talking about is right here. It is a great figure. I'll show it again. Since you brought it up, here it is. Here's the Gandalf figure. I really need to put it somewhere else. This is a great figure. And there he is. And he's got his pipe and he's got his staff, which I need to adjust more. But yes, there's Gandalf. And quite a good figure. And I need to move him somewhere, but I really do like this figure. Gandalf, one of the Astari, obviously. I'm glad you find that amusing. As long as I can make you laugh, man. Aaron became a member of the channel. Thanks, Aaron, for becoming a member. This Saturday, by the way, we will have another members stream. And it's also my birthday. So there you go. I'm doing some online hosting on certain conventions and things that I've been doing for the last year. So it's going to be fun, but we'll do another Zoom chat. I might postpone that chat until Sunday, though. I'm not sure yet. Mike Prez sends in a tip and says, with Spider-Man Home Slice bringing a 3-film arc to maybe some kind of end, I think there's more Disney can do with Spider-Man than we realize. Marvel has been making Spider-Man animated shows for years. Yeah, I mean, you never know. I think that I'm sure we're going to get more Spider-Man. I honestly believe that. But yeah, I think we're going to get a lot more Spider stuff. Midnight's Edge After Dark. Hello, Tom. Says 82 and 84 are arguably the best years amongst movies. Easy. Well, for those of you who don't know, we did our Midnight Metal show, and Tom and Andre from Midnight's Edge we all stopped by. I think we had a great. Well, they stopped by. I think we had a great conversation. Go watch that on Midnight Metal. It is in fact metal. So there you go. Mike Prez also says Marvel is making She-Hulk on their own without Universal involved. I think Marvel could make a well-financed Spider-Man animated show for Disney Plus. I think so. A show that they wouldn't need Sony's approval for, or what if there's a gray area for Marvel? Oh, I think, Mike, I don't think anything to do with Spider-Man, it's controlled by Sony. So there's really no way around that, unfortunately. There's nothing we can do. Mike Prez also goes on to say, this is one of two. A show that wouldn't need Sony's approval, or what if there's a gray area? Marvel could do a live action show. That's a big if. It couldn't look like Holland, but even if there is a gray area, how would Marvel approach it? Would someone like Feige mention the idea of it publicly to see Sony's reaction? No, that's not how the entertainment business works. Sony has locked up the rights to the Spider-Man character. And there's really no way they don't play those shenanigans. The only time you hear about this stuff is when somebody's already made a deal. So that's really all they can do. So I don't know. I mean, they have a fruitful collaboration now. It would be a shame. It would be a shame to jeopardize their fruitful collaboration. But I don't know. I mean, I think we're going to have more live action Spider-Man movies, and eventually Sony is going to take Spider-Man back, but now they still have Morbius coming. They have Venom 2, Let There Be Carnage. We've got those coming, so which is pretty interesting. Yeah, so I think it's all good. We're going to see whatever we're going to see. I hope we get more and more great Spider-Man, and I think that's probably, I guess, the most important thing that you can get. Terrier says, let's chat about Cats and Bond movies. Well, Terrier, I'm telling you, man, Terrier's in Norway. Cats and Bond movies go together like chocolate and peanut butter. Blofeld and his cat. You know, what's I don't know what to say. I don't know what to talk about other than I love it when Ernst Stavro Blofeld has his white cat, usually wearing a diamond necklace. Isn't that the best thing ever? We love that. And I do love cats. Preston Bell sends in a super chat and says, wait, so you did Robservations, whining about movies, and Midnight Metal in one day? Yes, I did, Preston. Yes, I did. On top of Elizabeth making up yet another show for you? Now that is fucking metal. We did. On the other night on our stream, I believe it was our stream about Predestination, Elizabeth wanted to talk about the different shows that we're watching, the series, not the movies. So she came up with an idea for a show called What the F Are We Watching? And I said, bah, we'll do that because we've been rewatching Game of Thrones. So it'd be really fun to talk about Game of Thrones and to go through it. So we're hoping to debut What the F Are We Watching on Thursday, and it would be about our rewatch of Game of Thrones, which should probably be pretty close to done by then. So Preston, yeah, I guess it's pretty metal. We just keep going and going and going. Alex Acera says, it's really 90s nostalgia now. Resident Evil is going to be rebooted in 98. Nightbreed and Event Horizon are back, etc. Oh, where's an Icon movie? Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, it is. I just don't think the 90s were as fun. I mean, that's because I was older, but I don't think they had as much excitement. Muted colors. So, yeah. Why don't they make an Icon movie? there's the movie to make. Nick Paris says, "What's up, Rob? So for Professor R&B today in the classroom of Robservations, I have to ask you to please explain the chaos surrounding the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. I don't follow the Hollywood Foreign Press closely, but it's all over the news about how Hollywood is giving them the Thor hammer. It is true, the Golden Globes, which is presented by the Hollywood Foreign Press, there's much controversy because basically in the Hollywood Foreign Press, there's no representation. There's no diversity. And so it's become hugely problematic for them. And today, NBC, let's see, Hollywood reacts. NBC canceled the Golden Globes. So I'll read this article. After NBC put more pressure on the beleaguered Hollywood Foreign Press Association to demand reform within the organization by announcing that it would not be airing the 2022 Golden Globes, reactions from the entertainment industry figures quickly started flooding in. "Everything matters, even this," tweeted filmmaker Ava DuVernay. "The ripple effects echo throughout our industry, especially for black artists and artists of color. Kudos to all the activists, artists, publicists, and executives who took a stand to make this so." Prolific showrunner Shonda Rhimes echoed DuVernay's sentiment. "Every step forward matters," she wrote. "So many people in front of and behind the camera at the studios and streamers and PR firms took a stand to shift a piece of this business model that affects the economic futures of artists who are often tokenized or not included. These steps can work in any industry." The following reactions. Actor Mark Ruffalo also chimed in after weighing how recently to say that he cannot feel proud of his recent Globes win for HBO's I Know This Much Is True. "Thank you, NBC," he wrote, "for taking the time to do this right. Change is golden." Civil rights advocacy group Color of Change noted it had made its demands abundantly clear to the Hollywood Golden Globes organizer alongside Time's Up Coalition. Last week, the Hollywood Foreign Press failed to deliver, they said, but today NBC Universal announced that they would be withdrawing their support for the Golden Globes in 2022, a testament to the power of our coalition. The work to change Hollywood continues. Stay tuned for more. Lionsgate and Starz likewise responded with praise for the network. "We applaud NBC's decisive action to require the Hollywood Foreign Press to make the transformational changes that are needed in their membership structure and practices." Representatives for Lionsgate and Starz said in a statement, "Until they do, we join with our industry colleagues in withdrawing from the Hollywood Foreign Press activities." Meanwhile, Universal's own news editor, Andrew V. Pistano, why can't I read today? Reacted by urging Rick Gervais to host a new show in 2022 in lieu of the Golden Globes, a special roasting of the Hollywood elite, with former Globes host Gervais playing along and dubbing it the Golden Balls. Deadline will update this story. Yes, I mean, the Hollywood Foreign Press does not have a very good track record for having inclusion. People of all shapes, size, colors, creeds. It's predominantly, as you might expect, white, and so everyone's up in arms and wants all that changed, and they want it changed now. So that's what's going on. Gil Cardinal Sin says, "Greetings, Rob, mods, and chat. What is up, my friends?" Well, we all are. It's the middle of the day here, but I'm sure it's the dark of the moon somewhere else on the other side of the planet. But yes. Thanks for saying hello, Gil. I appreciate that. Alexander Wilson sends in a tip and says, "Regarding Prince, Morris Day told the story that Prince performed at a motorcycle festival in 81. The crowd hated him, threw beers and beer bottles at him, called him gay slurs. It upset him so much that he wanted to quit music. Thoughts?" Well, I could see that. I mean, when he played with the Rolling Stones, he was still in his lingerie phase. People didn't really understand him or where he was coming from. But, I could see that. Again, Prince did himself no favors by how he dressed back then. I mean, I thought it was great, but you look at the cover of, like, Dirty Mind, and the way he would dress, it's like, what are you supposed to be conveying? I loved it all because I loved Prince. But yeah, he, I can see that because they're not paying attention for him. They're just paying attention to my persona. They're not paying attention to the music. And Prince was all about the music. And if they hated him just to hate him, I can understand why he'd want to bail. That's not cool. Sheriff Carl says, I'm late to the show, but I think one reason there is so much 80s nostalgia is that those of us who were kids in the 80s grew up with VHS, meaning we could revisit what we loved over and over and over again. For me, the VCR and the Star Wars trilogy was my favorite babysitter. I think there's a lot to that, Sheriff Carl. I was talking about that early on the show. Being able to pick your own entertainment and watch it was something that never existed before. And that was hugely impactful because it made people, especially us, aware of the fact that they can curate their own programming, and that was never possible before. But I think the downside of that is that, by doing that, your attention span's not being developed, because if you don't like it, you just pop it out and watch something else. Whereas when we were watching TV when we were kids and things just came on, that's what you watched, and you knew you had to stick it out through the duration. And sometimes I discovered a lot of things that I loved that I wouldn't have normally seen if I didn't stick with them. So, yeah. 200 Watt Studio says, I saw Return of the Jedi on opening night in Michigan. I was 17 and I was disappointed. I knew something was wrong. I actually noticed the choppy editing. Yeah, it was not so good, unfortunately. 200 Watt Studio goes on to say, I saw an interview with Gary Kurtz on why he left the production of Return of the Jedi. After Raiders, George changed the story of Return of the Jedi away from character development to reflect the nonstop action of Raiders. Kurtz left to Willow, lamenting the character work that they had planned. Yep. I agree. I agree with that, and I'm sure it's true. Unfortunately, Jedi, bummer. I know people love it. It's my favorite Star Wars movie, says John Campia, but I just can't go there. It seems too sloppy, and it just doesn't have much of a story. Matthew Smith sends in a tip and says, what's up, Rob? I just finished Saturday's episode while I was mowing the lawn. The real lawn. Get your mind out of the gutter. Got a letter on my Starship collection in the works. Expect it soon. Any updates on when the short story contest will be updated? Yep. The short story contest will be officially launched on the 700th episode of the show. As we finish the film festival, we will launch the short story competition. And I'm going to make the new deadline's going to be the 4th of July. So there you go. Wayne Edwards became a member. Thanks for becoming a member, Wayne. Alexander Wilson says, what about Hollywood historically whitewashing real-life people of color in film, like Angelina Jolie playing an Afro-Cuban in A Mighty Pearl, Ben Affleck playing a Mexican in Argo, etc.? It's like nobody talks about that. Also, crack and HIV ravaged urban cities. You mean during the 80s? It did. Crack and HIV, a lot of the time they went hand in hand, were ravaging our cities. I talked a little bit about that. It was not good. Not good, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, look, I think the only reason that when it comes right down to it, the reason that you don't see more people of color or like different mixes of an Afro-Cuban in A Mighty Pearl is a lot of it has to do with the people that are available, like in terms of maybe age group, or are they right for the part or not. I mean, I think more than anything, that's what it is there aren't, I'm sure there's a lot of actors and actresses, but if you find an Afro-Cuban actress to play that part, she already has to be a box office draw, otherwise the movie won't get financed. And that's what it really comes down to, is it comes down to the financing of movies. Are the financiers going to get their money back? It's all a money issue. So you got to get the best person you can. But I've always maintained a good movie will, it doesn't matter what your lead is, it doesn't matter what color they are. If the movie's good, the movie's going to be good. If it's well written and well directed, it'll find an audience at some point. D-Rock Media says, hi, Rob. I hope you're well. I just saw the Venom 2 trailer, and I'm stoked. Been waiting since the 90s for this. Rock on. Did you get a chance to listen to Anvil of Crom? I have not listened to Anvil of Crom, the version that you sent me, but I want to. I just haven't done it yet. I probably will today. How easy is it, Thought? How easy is it, though? Rob, how easy is it to simply create an original multi-million-dollar superhero franchise? Oh, it's not. It's incredibly difficult, especially one that's a minority character. It's even harder. Just make one up, people say, but will the general public even bother to pay attention to it? I don't think so myself. Well, Hancock with Will Smith was an original character, superhero that was original to that film. It didn't do too badly. 200 Watt Studio says, I'm sure the Golden Globes thing had nothing to do with the Oscars. You know, wait, hang on. I want to go back to that other thing. I think you're right. It's really hard. It's hard to create any character. It doesn't matter whether they're black or white or yellow or brown or straight or gay. Writing a great character that transcends whatever the story is that you're telling to permeate pop culture, tall order. Really hard thing to do. And I don't mean to make it sound easy, because it's not. It's really, really hard. But if you just look, again, like anything else, a great story well told. If you come up with, I never thought a movie like RoboCop would work. I'm like, RoboCop? What the hell is that? And then, of course, I saw it, and I'm like, oh, I was wrong. So, coming up with great characters and great stories is really hard, but it's just as hard coming up with a character for some white dude as it is for a black guy. So I don't know. I'd always err on the side of trying to make it happen. But what you're asking, making up something as opposed to something that has pop cultural legacy or generational knowledge of, like Superman, well, that's kind of priceless. Hard to duplicate that. Matt Guillemette says, 200 Watt Studio says, I'm sure the Golden Globes thing had nothing to do with the Oscar rating or even the Golden Globes history of pay to play, laugh out loud. No one cares about award shows anymore. That might be part of it. But I think, the place Hollywood holds in everybody's mind is just changing. So I think that's probably it. But yeah. Do we need the Golden Globes anyway? I don't know. I don't think I'll be sorry to see them go. Matt Guillemette sends in a super chat and says, I had a dream that I super chatted you, so it must be God's will for me to tip you this. Well, thank you. I honestly think The Bad Batch is way more better than Star Wars 9. The storytelling is key with this guy. I haven't seen all The Bad Batch. It's not all out yet. They're dropping it weekly, right? I like where it started. I'll be curious to see where it's going to go, but I would tend to agree with you. I would tend to agree with you, sir. The storytelling, I did not like episode 9. Talk about half-baked. Mr. Intellectual says, why 80s nostalgia, Sir Rob? We are in troubling times. Did you see last SNL with Elon Musk? Well, all the Gen Z and the wokes sure did. They hate it. Not for the trash writing, but because it's critical of them. Because it questions their very theories. That could very well be. The question is, was it good? Was it funny? I watched a few sketches. They were, they weren't great. I mean, I don't understand. Doing that is hard enough if you're a performer. But Elon Musk? I mean, he wasn't horrible. But that's a tough thing to do. It's a hard thing to do. And to put somebody up there, man, that's rough. 200 Watt Studio sends in a super chat and says, isn't also about agents and producers are looking for a project for their favorite actors and actresses and the how about putting blah, blah, blah in the picture instead? Yeah, that's all part of it. I mean, look, it's all about being risk averse. And even if you have $200 million to spend like studios do, they need to make sure that these top 5 actors have to be in it and these top actresses have to be in it. I mean, there's so much that goes on. But yeah, it's all a part of it. It's all a part of, well, all of it. And, I don't know. I don't know about the Hollywood Foreign Press. Is anyone really going to miss the Golden Globes? I don't know. I mean, I'll miss Ricky Gervais hosting them, but I don't know. Yeah. But yes, like you said, it is hard to get your favorite actors and actresses in things. And if you want to work with them again, you come up with projects that you want them to be in, which I'm all for. I think it's great. Well, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gentle beings, kind souls, I'm going to jump off this. Once again, I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. This was Robservations episode number 684. Alexander Wilson does say they could have gotten Rosario Dawson instead of Angelina Jolie, who was around the same age when Marianne Pearl told her story. I think that's good casting, but the thing is Angelina Jolie is an Academy Award-winning actress. And they figure they go with her, they're going to get more people. There's more name value. That's why they wouldn't go with a Rosario Dawson. Not that she's not a great actress, because she is. But in terms of getting a movie like this made, they need that name actress to put on the marquee to get it made. I mean, that's unfortunately, for rightly or wrongly, that's what they do. I want to thank my moderators. I want to thank Louise X. Sparrow. I want to thank the Richard. I want to thank, of course, Mike Bodden. Bunyan Snipe is here. I don't know who else is here. Darren Seeley is here. Thank you, Darren. And I think that's everybody. I want to thank you all for moderating. I want to thank everybody for supporting this channel via Super Chats and tips. And also, if you want to send me letters, I'll read them on the show. You can send them to me at theburnettwork.net. And hopefully I'll read them on the air. And with that, I would say to everyone, thanks for tuning in today. And as always, have a better day.